أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Which means, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. I bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah and Allah alone, that Allah has no partners, no associates. There is nothing and no one comparable to Allah. And I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is his last divinely sent messenger and the seal of the prophethood. Ameen. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's thought-provoking topic is MalcomX setting the record straight. I want to begin with a release that was posted to the website of the Innocence Project, and they subsequently released this through the various media for public consumption. The title of the release, which was updated on February 19th of this year, 2 innocent men spent 20 years in prison for Malcolm X's murder. And it reads as follows. On February 21st, 1965, hundreds of people gathered at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City to hear Malcolm X speak. But moments after he took the stage, shots rang out, and by 3:30 p.m. that day, Malcolm X was dead. 3 members of the Nation of Islam, a religious and political group, were quickly arrested. Mujahid Abdul Halim, then known as Talmadge Hayer, and also known as Thomas Hagen, Muhammad Abdulaziz, then known as Norman 3X Butler, and Khalil Islam, then known as Thomas 15X Johnson. All 3 men were convicted in 1966 and sentenced to life in prison. But 2 of them, Aziz and Islam, have always maintained their innocence. Islam died in 2009, but Aziz, now 81, is still fighting to clear his name. In light of new information uncovered in the 6-part documentary series, Who Killed Malcolm X, the Innocence Project is working with civil rights attorney David Shanies of David B. Shanies Law Office and the Conviction Integrity Program of the New York County District Attorney's Office to reinvestigate Aziz and Islam's convictions. In Who Killed Malcolm X, historian Abdur Rahman Muhammad seeks answers to the many questions that surround the assassination of Malcolm X even decades after his death, including whether or not the actual perpetrators of his murder were caught. The series is available to stream on Netflix. We are grateful that District Attorney Vance quickly agreed to conduct a review of the conviction of Muhammad Aziz. Given the historical importance of this case and the fact that our client is 81 years old, we are especially encouraged that Mr. Vance has assigned 2 highly respected prosecutors, Peter Casolaro and Charles King, to work on this reinvestigation. Innocence Project and David B. Shanies of the Shanies Law Office said in a joint statement. Mr. Casolaro did extraordinary work on the case of the exonerated 5, and Mr. King is an experienced member of the Conviction Integrity Program. We look forward to working cooperatively with them to see that justice is done." End quote. And then there was a petition and an invitation to sign on to the petition to request that the truth concerning the murder of Malcolm be fully explored. The statement goes on to say, "Many questions about Malcolm's assassination remain, but here is what we know. Aziz had an alibi. At the time of the assassination, Aziz was at home nursing recent leg injuries. The day of the murder, which was a Sunday morning, I was laying over the couch with my foot up." This is a quote. "And I heard it over the radio," Aziz remembers in Who Killed Malcolm X. In addition to multiple alibi witnesses, a doctor who treated Aziz at Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx just hours before Malcolm's murder took the stand in Aziz's defense. Halim admitted to taking part in the assassination, but insisted that Aziz and Islam were innocent. Both Aziz and Islam have always maintained their innocence, and Halim has consistently confirmed that fact. At trial in 1996, Halim admitted his guilt and testified that neither Aziz nor Islam was involved. He said, quote, "I just want to testify that Butler and Johnson had nothing to do with it. I was there. I know what happened, and I know the people who were there," Halim said. However, he did not name those who had joined him in the attack at that time. This was during the trial. It wasn't until 1978 that Halim finally identified the 4 other men who he said carried out the assassination with him. In an affidavit given to civil rights lawyer William Kunstler, Halim described his co-conspirators, provided their addresses, and laid out a detailed timeline of the assassination plot. Kunstler then obtained previously undisclosed FBI documents through Freedom of Information Act requests that supported Halim's account. Despite this new information, Judge Harold Rothwax rejected Kunstler's motion to vacate the convictions of Aziz and Islam in 1978. New York County prosecutors said that they were not aware of and had never seen the FBI documents at the time of the 1966 trial. Let me also note here, because it's not in this piece, that after Kunstler failed to get the case reopened because of the clear, bigoted position of this judge who presided over the matter then, he took the issue to Congress. He attempted to bring the case before a receptive congressional committee. And no doubt he spoke with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, no doubt. But there he was unsuccessful there as well. I had an opportunity to have a brief conversation with the late Bill Kunstler before he passed away years ago on this very controversy. And he was very passionate. He was very passionate about wanting to get the names of those who were wrongfully convicted cleared. And he was representing the brother who was the only one to admit, who admitted that he was there. Well, he couldn't deny it because he was actually captured at the scene. He was injured. He would have been torn apart by the mob if it had not been for the police being able to get him away. But he maintained throughout that the other 2 men were not guilty. And this brother Halim, he has, I believe, he has made very sincere tawbah and worked to try to atone for the unfortunate role that he played as a very young man in that assassination. But getting back to this release, again, this release was several months ago, earlier this year. Halim reiterated that Aziz and Islam were innocent and advocated for their exoneration through the 70s and 80s, as seen in taped interviews featured in Who Killed Malcolm X. Journalists and scholars today widely believe that Aziz and Islam were innocent, including Manning Marable, author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. Investigation into the life and death of Malcolm X over the years has uncovered new materials, including declassified FBI documents, indicating that Aziz and Islam did not commit the crime, yet the case has not been reopened or relitigated in decades. Aziz was released on parole in 1985, but has continued to carry the burden of this wrongful conviction for decades. He still hopes to prove his innocence. Now, we all are aware of the fact that an exoneration did take place just recently. Both men were officially, judicially cleared of having any participation in the assassination of Malcolm. But again, other issues are raised. In the wake of these exonerations, and among the issues that are raised are the belief in the minds of many out there that there were no efforts to bring attention to the question of who killed Malcolm X, who was truly responsible for the assassination up until this superbly made Netflix documentary. And that is simply not the case. And so what we wanted to do today is, make a little effort to help set the record straight. Brothers and sisters, friends of Salam Media and the Afia Foundation and El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan, there have been sustained efforts over many years to indict, many efforts made in the court of public opinion through a variety of ways over the years, over the decades, to bring justice to this issue of who killed Malcolm, who was responsible for the death of Malcolm. What I want to do now is share a bit of video from just one of those efforts, one of those many efforts. There are two very beautiful souls that have passed on. We want to hear from them. And inshallah ta'ala, after you see these two pieces of video, and Brother Sadiq, I like for these to be shown back to back, both of these videos. I'd like for them to be shown back to back so that folks can see and hear from two of the courageous, trailblazing activists, human rights activists, that for years up until their passing, along with their many affiliates, were doing their best to bring attention to the case of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, the assassination of Malcolm, and to bring attention to who was responsible. I mean, there were many forums that were held in different parts of the country. I think the majority of them in New York City, the Big Apple, that drew attention. But there were also other efforts by others in different parts of the country raising the issue. There were books written, speeches delivered, anyway. Let's get to the videos, and then we'll pick up this conversation, inshallah ta'ala, on the other side.
Testimonies. And for the first of those, we'd like to bring to the podium someone who in many respects needs no introduction. She is a longtime Harlem activist, particularly in the struggle against racism. She was a member of the Organization of African American Unity, which says something about the vision of Malcolm as he was moving. Again, she needs no introduction. She is our friend and comrade, Yuri Kochiyama.
For not only those who were in the Audubon on February 21st, 1965, but for all of Malcolm's followers wherever they were and are now. That fateful date is one which has not only become a day of sorrow, but a day of rededication for which Malcolm lived and died for. Now, as I recall that date, February 21st, 1965, I was sitting in the same booth as Herman Ferguson. That's the same, right? Which was, I think, about the 7th or 8th row. I mean, equivalent to the 7th or 8th row where the chairs were. I was with my 16-year-old son, Billy. I was taking notes of Brother Benjamin's message. He had just finished saying, just before introducing him, Malcolm is the kind of man who would die for you. When the distraction, get your hands out of my pocket, took place from across from where we were sitting, all eyes were turned to the distraction. Malcolm tried to calm the people, saying, "Cool it, brothers, cool it." Then shots rang out from the front. Malcolm fell straight backward. And it was like then all hell broke loose. Chairs crashing to the floor, people hitting the floor, people chasing the killers, a few more gunshots, and something like a smoke bomb was thrown. It was utter chaos. It was then that a young brother, and I think his name was Hassan, ran past where I was sitting. He was heading for the stage, so I followed him and went right to Malcolm. He was having difficulty breathing. I put his head on my lap. Others came and opened his shirt. He was hit many times in the chest, and one by his right here and one in his finger. I hoped he would say something. He never said a word. Then someone told me to go to the side room on the stage and handed me the youngest Malcolm child and a bottle. By then, the room was in an uproar. Anger, shock, disbelief, frustration. Then the medics came from across the street, Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and took him away. We must not forget, however, some of the sequences of that time. The week before, Malcolm's house in East Elmhurst was bombed. That was the 14th. What has been almost forgotten is that 2 days later, on the 16th of February, 3 of his closest followers were busted in the Statue of Liberty bombing charge. 2 were his security men, top martial artists, Walter Bowe and Khalil Saeed, and the other was activist Bob Collier. They were implicated through a police provocateur. It was like the police or FBI wanted to take away those who would have protected Malcolm. Also remember that the 116th Street Mosque was torched shortly after Malcolm was killed, seemingly orchestrated to try to bring a fratricide between Malcolm's Muslims and the Nation of Islam. Tonight, we are fortunate to have two speakers who have done heavy research and investigation on what happened on February 21st, prior to that date and after it. The question must be not just who killed Malcolm, but why was he killed? Who gained from it? Who was paid? Most of all, February 21st, 1965 must be remembered for what Malcolm lived and died for, the objectives he fought for: self-determination, independence, human rights, and human dignity by any means necessary. The struggle must continue. Thank you.
Would you now please welcome our dear friend and freedom fighter, Herman Ferguson.
Thank you, comrades, brothers and sisters. I would like you to close your eyes for a moment and let us step back into the past. It is now February 21st, 1965, a sunny Sunday afternoon. I'm driving in my car going north along Broadway towards the Audubon Ballroom. I reach 166th Street and I make a right turn. That's right across from the Presbyterian Hospital. And as I pass the front of the Audubon Ballroom, I notice there's no parking space. Out of the corner of my eye to my left, standing by that little pigeon park, that's what they used to call that little triangular-shaped thing there where people used to come and sit and rest, there was one lone policeman in uniform standing there. And I say to myself, that's odd. Usually there is a full contingent, at least a dozen to 18 policemen in and around the building. I drive on, I find a parking space. I get out of my car, I walk back to the entrance to the Audubon Ballroom. I notice that that lone police officer is gone. There are no policemen anywhere in sight. Noting that, feeling a bit apprehensive, I move up the stairs and I begin to greet the brothers and sisters who are members of the OAAU. And I take my seat in the center aisle. The place is filled with people. I look over to my left and I see Yuri Kochiyama and 5 or 6 other members of the OAAU sitting in a booth. And they beckon to me to come over. I go over, and I sit with them. And we're greeting one another as Brother Benjamin comes on the stage. And after Brother Benjamin introduces Brother Malcolm, Brother Benjamin turns, and he's now walking back to take a seat in the row of chairs, empty chairs that are on the stage. Malcolm had come out on the stage for a few seconds before, and he had taken a seat. Now Malcolm stands. He moves to the podium. Benjamin turns to move away from the podium. As their paths cross, Malcolm stops Benjamin, and he whispers in his ear. And Benjamin turns and goes off stage and starts down the stairs on the left-hand side of the auditorium, and he reaches about the middle of the auditorium when a voice rings out and a chair falls over. "Get your hands out of my pocket!" All eyes turn in that direction. I turn. I see 2 men, one with his hand in his pocket, crouched, backing away from one who is claiming his pocket has been picked. Malcolm, I swing back around quickly because my instincts tell me this is something strange happening here. This is most unusual. Malcolm steps out from behind the podium and he leans forward and he says, "Cool it, brothers and sisters." And he straightens up like this, and a loud shot rings out, boom! Malcolm was bringing his hand down. His hand shoots up like this, and he stands there, rigid. as gunfire begins to ring out. And I remember saying to myself as I sat there, why don't they stop shooting? It seemed to me as though Malcolm hung there for 15 or 20 seconds. And then he toppled over. He did not crumble, he fell like a tree in the forest. The back of his head hit the stage with a thud. And I remember saying to myself, if the bullets didn't kill him, he could never survive that blow to the back of his head. And I sat there and watched as they fired round after round into his body. And then I noticed another very peculiar thing across the top of the stage where the curtain was drawn. There were lights flickering off on, all the way across and back, flickering one after the other, yellowish lights, like flash bulbs. And I remember saying to myself, this is being filmed. They're taking movies of this. At first I thought it was gunfire coming from the ceiling. But the way that it was going, flickering back and forth, and I know what the muzzle fire, what it looked like when bullets are coming from the muzzle of a gun, and that was not what that was. And I sat there. The firing ceased. By this time, some of the people in the booth had pulled me under the table. I go under the table feet first. My head is stuck out in the aisle, and I'm looking, observing, and I see the whole hall is empty. Chairs knocked over, everybody on the floor, and I look in the center aisle and 3 men are standing, and they're facing the rear entrance. One man in the front is wearing a cap and a quarter-length coat of a dark color. His right hand was at his side, and he seemed to be holding a weapon of some kind. I can't make out what it is. And they stand there as though frozen in time. And then, as if a signal had been given, they start running towards the back of the building, stepping over fallen bodies and over the chairs that were strewn all about the place. I watched them until they got almost to the exit, and then I began to hear gunfire. Somebody is again shooting. I later find that it is one of our security people who, in violation of Malcolm's order that they should not be armed at any time, brought his gun, and he fired at these people and hit one of those men. I came out from under the table after I saw the last of the 3 men disappear around the corner toward the stairs. And I looked on the stage. I could see Malcolm's feet. I could see the soles of his shoes. And I said to myself, he's gone. And there's nothing I can do to help him. And for some reason, I turned and I went outside behind those men those 3 men who had made their escape. As I came out on the sidewalk, I noticed slightly to my right, a crowd of people were holding a man in the air, pulling him by his arms and legs. 2 or 3 policemen were trying to break up the crowd. One of them fired a round in the air, and they were able to take this person. They put him in the car. They drove down to the street or the corner of the building and turned right out of sight. I walked over to the intersection of Broadway and 166th Street. There was a pharmaceutical store on that corner. And I stood there. I didn't know what to think. I was confused, but I knew to watch everything. And as I stood there, a police car came down Broadway, turned into 166th Street, and parked at an angle, or stopped at an angle right there on that corner, about 10 or 15 feet from where I was standing by the building. One police officer was in that car. That car stood there for a few moments, and then I saw a policeman coming towards that car, escorting a person by the arm who was bent over, doubled over, and appeared to be in tremendous pain. He brought this person to the car, opened the rear door, put him in the car. The police officer then gets in on the passenger side of the car. And I remember saying, that must be one of our people. I wonder who it is. I walked over to the car. The window was down. I put my head inside the window and looked in this person's face. I didn't recognize him. It was not one of our people. He was wearing a fez, gold embroidered. He had on an overcoat. As I recall, the suit looked sort of a brownish color, and the man had a kind of an oriental cast to his face, oriental features. And the officer who had brought him to the car turned to the driver and says, "Get out of here." And they drove off, went straight ahead, past 166th Street, down the incline and out of sight. I had expected that car to make a U-turn and turn right across the street with the injured person to the hospital, but they didn't. It was obvious when I looked in that man's face, he was in serious, severe pain and was holding his abdomen and was bent over. When the newspapers hit the street in the early evening, they announced that 2 people had been arrested. Later that evening, when the second edition hit the street, that headline had changed, and they were now reporting that only 1 person had been arrested. But I had seen another person taken away by the police. Who was that person? The memory of that day has stayed with me. I wake up at night thinking about it. I deliberately impressed on my mind all of the details that I could recall. The police subpoenaed me to testify. They called me in for an interrogation, and they wanted to put words in my mouth. They wanted me to say that I had seen certain things that I had not seen. The district attorney and a room full of New York City detectives and other intelligence agents who obviously were from the CIA or the FBI. They grilled me for almost 3 hours, and I refused to tell them anything because they were trying to put words in my mouth. And as a matter of fact, I told them that one of the reasons why they were so interested in hear what I had to say was because of their own implication. And I said the only reason, the only way that any people would come into the Audubon Ballroom, where Malcolm is addressing 500 to 600 of his very loyal followers and supporters, without understanding clearly that their escape is guaranteed. And I said, and the only people who could do that is the New York City Police Department. So I'll have nothing to do with you. And I think that's where my troubles began. Thank you.
So there you go, brothers and sisters, friends. The purpose of this 1-hour broadcast today on this hot issue, this issue that has remained hot for over 5 decades, is because there is so much ambiguity still, layered on this controversy. And it's not by chance, it's by design. The 2 activists you just saw, may Allah bless their souls, was Yuri Kuchiyama, a Japanese American sister who was very close to the Shabazz family, very close to both Malcolm and Betty. She was a valued member of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And I've heard that she had also embraced Islam. In fact, the way it was described to me was that she had secretly, quote unquote, secretly embraced Islam. And she had studied under a couple of sheikhs, I guess, who were pretty well known back in the day. But whether she had embraced Islam or not, and I hope the report is true that she did before she passed away. It was very clear that this was a very committed, loving, and courageous sister in the struggle for justice in this country. And the other brother, the other elder who has passed on, in fact, they both passed, if I'm not mistaken, they passed in the same year. If they didn't pass in the same year, they were no more than a year or two apart when they passed. But I believe it was in the same year. And they were about the same age. They were both in their 90s when they passed. But Herman Ferguson, another courageous and dedicated soul to the principles and the struggle that Malcolm symbolized. What they both had to say in this one of many presentations that they did over the years. And this one was in New York. But what they had to say speaks volumes about the continued efforts that took place over the years in different parts of America to keep the spotlight of attention on the question of who killed Malcolm and why. This is something that has been an ongoing effort. And in fact, we ourselves have been a part of that effort. I've written, I don't know how many articles over the years. I participated in programs in different venues at colleges and universities, I should say from the street corners to colleges and universities. We've been in churches, we've been in mosques, in masajid. We've been in many different venues talking about Malcolm and his legacy. And we are just a part of this beautiful tapestry of conscious resistance to the official account. So we wanted to, just underscore that point, but we also wanted to deal with a few other myths that are important to note. Malcolm did not leave the NOI, the organization called the Nation of Islam. Malcolm did not leave. He was put out. The 90-day suspension that he was given for his remarks on the Kennedy assassination became indefinite after those 90 days were up. And this was all part and parcel of what I have described over the years as both an internal and an external conspiracy that were unofficially connected together. I have one of the quotes in the booklet that we published years ago, remembering what the Afia Foundation remembers Malcolm El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. The Afia Foundation remembers Malcolm. We published this book a few years back. One of the quotes in the book is a booklet, is Malcolm's Declaration of Independence, which was made on March 12th, 1964. This is what he said, quote, "Internal differences within the Nation of Islam forced me out of it. I did not leave of my own free will. But now that it has happened, I intend to make the most of it. Now that I have more independence of action, I intend to use a more flexible approach toward working with others to get a solution to this problem. I do not pretend to be a divine man, but I do believe in divine guidance, divine power, and in the fulfillment of divine prophecy. I am not educated, nor am I an expert in any particular field, but I am sincere, and my sincerity is my credential. End quote. Beautiful, beautiful quote. And this was Malcolm's stance. Malcolm did not become hostile toward the NOI, the organization that had given him wings, through, I should note, his own effort, through his own sincerity and commitment, through the dedication that he had to the program of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the nation, a dedication that resulted in him being the one primarily responsible for the rapid expanse, the rapid growth of the organization, with temples being established north, south, east, and west. Malcolm was the one primarily responsible for that. He was a very dedicated soul. And it wasn't until he and his family began to be attacked by members of the nation through the orchestration of individuals of two types within it. Individuals who were jealous of Malcolm, who were fearful of Malcolm's influence, should he be allowed to return to the fold in the same position that he held before the suspension. Why? Because Malcolm, could spot the hustlers. He could spot those who were in the organization in order to exploit it for their own sick and sinister designs. He was able to spot them because he had come from the same streets as they. So you had those who were concerned about Malcolm being readmitted and being able to check, their impulses. Then you had those who were jealous of Malcolm simply because that human weakness within them. They may have been sincere. They may not have been among the hustler class within the NOI, but that thing within them that made it difficult for them to resist the envy and the jealousy of this man who attracted so much attention both within and outside the nation. That human frailty of jealousy, of envy, of wanting to have what he had in terms of the stature, the position, the eloquence, the national attention, which later became international. That was very difficult for them to resist. And so you had these two elements of individuals within the NOI that that had a shared rationale for not wanting to see Malcolm returned into the fold. But then you had this third element in the nation. This third element was the element, the infiltrators, the agent provocateurs, the informants that had been planted within the nation to keep tabs of what was being said and what was being done. It came out that, right up there at headquarters in within the operating echelon of the NOI in Chicago, there were government agents. There were government agents, and there were government agents in different temples of the NOI around the country. as well. There were taps on the phone of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his top lieutenants, prominent ministers and other officials within the NOI in different parts of the country. The NOI was one of the principal targets of COINTELPRO, the government's counterintelligence program. But then it wasn't just the FBI who was keeping tabs. It was the CIA also keeping tabs on Malcolm, especially after he had begun to take these international trips. I want to share with you some of the statements that Malcolm made when he was abroad, beginning with the letter dated April 20th, 1964, from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He said, before America allows herself to be destroyed. Now, this letter was the letter that he sent back home to his family and his companions within the two organizations he had established, the Organization of Afro-American Unity and Muslim Mosque, Inc. These two organizations. And through them to the many people that followed him and supported him in different parts of the country. He wanted to send a message after he had made Hajj of the change in perspective, the change in worldview that he had experienced as a result of having made the pilgrimage to Mecca. He wrote, before America allows herself to be destroyed by the cancer of racism, she should become better acquainted with the religious philosophy of Islam, a religion that has already molded people of all colors into one vast family, a nation of brotherhood of Islam that leaps over all obstacles and stretches itself into almost all the eastern countries of this earth. The whites, as well as the non-whites who accept true Islam, become a changed people, end quote. This was one of the statements that he made in his letter from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. This was a statement that he made in Lagos, May 10th of 1964, to be specific, to be exact. He said, quote, the Quran compels the Muslim world to take a stand on the side of those whose human rights are being violated, no matter what the religious persuasion of the victim is. Islam is a religion which concerns itself with the human rights of all mankind, despite race, color, or creed. It recognizes everyone, as part of one human family. Here in Africa, the 22 million American blacks are looked upon as the long-lost brothers of Africa, end quote. This is what he had to say in Accra, Ghana, on May 11th, 1964. Quote, upon close study, one can see a gigantic design to keep Africans here and the African Americans from getting together. An African official told me, quote, when one combines the number of peoples of African descent in South, Central, and North America, they total well over 80 million. One can easily understand that attempts to keep the Africans from ever uniting with the African Americans. Unity between the Africans of the West and the Africans of the fatherland will well change the course of history, end quote. So, and this is what he said in Cairo, in 1964, in July of 1964. The organization, actually, no, this was the memorandum to the OAU, the Organization of African American Unity conference in Cairo. All right, this was the appeal to African heads of state. Very important. Quote, the Organization of Afro-American Unity has been formed by a cross-section of America's African American community and is patterned after the letter and spirit of the Organization of African Unity. Just as the Organization of African Unity has called upon all African leaders to submerge their differences and unite on common objectives for the common good of all Africans, in America, the Organization of Afro-American Unity has called upon the Afro-American leaders to submerge their differences and find areas of agreement wherein we can work in unity for the good of the entire 22 million African Americans, end quote. So this is the statement that came before the conference in Cairo from the organization that Malcolm established and led, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, patterned after the Organization of African Unity. This is what he said in a interview that he gave to the Egyptian Gazette in September of 1964. He said the number one weapon of 20th century imperialism, listen good, is Zionist dollarism. And one of the main bases for this weapon is Zionist Israel. The ever-scheming European imperialists wisely placed Israel where she could geographically divide the Arab world, infiltrate and sow the seeds of dissension among African leaders, and also divide the Africans against the Asians. The Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history, not even in their own religion. Where is their Messiah? End quote. This is deep. So you can see why, brothers and sisters, Malcolm also became a target of the CIA. Malcolm became a target of interest for the military-industrial complex. There were many who wanted El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz dead. I want to quickly just share just a few more points, and then inshallah ta'ala we'll bring this to a close with another thought-provoking piece of video that I want you to see. So again, you know, the international status of Malcolm, in that final year posed a threat to both camps. His international trips and contacts were closely monitored by the FBI and the CIA. Simultaneously, he was also attempting to repair and build bridges between Black resistance movements in the U.S., particularly the Black nationalist and civil rights movements. And we know that one of the central objectives of COINTELPRO, as it was upgraded in the mid-60s, was to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah, someone who would have the power to both electrify and unify those elements within the Black community that rogue elements within the U.S. government viewed as a threat. It is also clear by the historical record that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and some of his top ministers and headquarters staff in Chicago had made threatening suggestions regarding Malcolm before the hit took place on February 21st, 1965. Brother Mujahid Abdul Halim, the former Talmadge ex-Hayer, aka Thomas Hagen, in retrospect, he expressed over many years, over the course of years, he expressed deep regret. He embraced true Islam while he was incarcerated. He, you know, properly assessed his role in the assassination of as a role played by someone who was young and stupid, someone who blindly was mired in taqlid, blindly following his quote unquote leaders, and saw Malcolm back then as the chief hypocrite that he had been labeled as being, and so saw it as his duty to be a part of that hit squad. But he later came to deeply regret that. He made tawbah. He embraced true Islam, and he has worked hard, from what I understand, to doing good work to try to atone for what he had done. The other four, they appear to have gotten away with it in this life, but they certainly will not get away with it in the life to come. And my understanding is that most, if not all of them, are now deceased. I'm not absolutely clear if all of them are deceased, but certainly the shotgun man, the one who the coroner results say was the shot that actually took the life of Malcolm. He has passed on, and he was able to achieve some degree of I guess social redemption in the eyes of some of the folk who knew him, many of the folk who knew him in Newark, New Jersey, including politicians, certain senator up on Capitol Hill. But his affairs with Allah, and given the fact that he did not admit to and attempt to redeem himself in this life before his soul was taken, well, I wouldn't want to be in his shoes when his soul was taken. Allahu Alam. But Mujahid Abdul Halim, he has made tawbah. And he's worked again over the years to overcome the sin. He may be one of the best examples of the old adage that a hardship or a sin that brings us closer to Allah is better for us than a blessing that causes us to forget the remembrance of Allah. I'm gonna stop here because we are we are at the end of the hour. I want to simply say this. This issue of our black shining prince, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, aka MalcomX, it is an issue that carries so many lessons. So many lessons. And these lessons will be with us, for who knows how many years into the future. I guess the main point that I wanted to focus upon today is the fact that this well-made documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X, should not be viewed as solely responsible for the exoneration of the two innocent men who were wrongfully convicted, should not be viewed as the the sole reason why now there is so much awareness of the many complex and thought-provoking intricacies surrounding Malcolm and his assassination and what led up to it. Again, this is, we want to give credit where credit is due. That documentary was well done, and it is something that can be pointed to as having been one of the, it could be viewed as the culminating gem of the campaign for full disclosure at one level. It's we like to use sports metaphors in this culture of ours. From my view, it's in terms of revealing certain truths that had already been revealed in other areas, but were not widely known. It was like the being at first and goal on the football field, first and goal, and that last play between the quarterback and the receiver that takes the game over the goal line and scores the winning touchdown. That's what this documentary represents to me. It's well done, beautifully made, very powerful, and but at the end of the day, it was what took the ball across the goal line. But there had been this march going on for years and years and years, that all those who were part of it, Yuri Kuchiyama and Herman Ferguson and so many others, those who wrote about it, Professor Zach Kondo and so many others, can take some measure of pride in having been a part of. With that, I want to end with the verse from the Quran that we like to close out with, but then followed by the verse, just a less than a 2-minute piece of video of a statement made by a daughter of El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan, who just recently passed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless her soul. Malika Shabazz. We want to close with her after making this dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati wattawassaw bil haqq wattawassaw bis sabr. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. With that, let us allow Sister Malika to close this out.
I want to say that it took my father a lifetime to become a Muslim. And the proudest thing was that he was able to die a Muslim.
Alhamdulillah.
A Muslim.
Alhamdulillah.
And that means a lot. And I think that is what allowed for his influence to be so great. He was very dedicated. There was nothing that could take him away from his focus. And that's very important. You have to stay focused to make sure that what we read in the Quran, we live. The Quran is a great guide. It is a great guide. I've read the Quran 3 times in the past 10 years to my 9-year-old daughter. And when we finish, I start over. And that's how I've been able to make it. Not having both my parents, not having the right people within society, because I haven't met many dedicated people. Instead, people say to me, you need to let that go. You can't let it go. You can't let it go. So I use the Quran to guide me. And I recommend everyone, men, women, and children, to read it daily because it is a perfect guide.